Folks, welcome to a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. My question for all of you today is, what is your measure of success? For this host, it is to enlighten, not through my own pontifications, but the words of my guests. My guests often communicate through instrumental music, which at one time in this country was flourishing, with hotbeds of regional jazz, soul, and blues, intermeshed with the opportunity for audiences to witness the music firsthand. Jazz's birthplace is in Harlem, and a vibrant local scene continues to this day. One of the most important contributors to this prolonged vibe is my guest. He was a district attorney who needed to get something out of his system, that according to Al Cohn and Zoot Sims. So he became one of the most prolific promoters of jazz that the city has ever seen. Pure jazz with musicians who cultivated the fertile soil of Manhattan. Bucky Pizzarelli and Milt Hinton. Buddy Rich and Sonny Fortune. Tributes to Bird and George Wein. And a dedication to making sure somehow that his love of the music gets passed along to future generations. Jack Kleinsinger, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
How are you? A couple of corrections, okay? I was Assistant Attorney General for the state of New York. Not district attorney.
That's a big important thing. Thank you.
Okay, and I don't agree that the birthplace of jazz was Harlem. In fact, I'm one of these people who doesn't believe there was a birthplace of jazz. My argument with Ken Burns, who says it all started in New Orleans, is that, in Europe in the same time, Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli were playing. If you listen to some klezmer music and even some Irish music, I discovered, you hear elements of jazz as close as anything. And Harlem was late. Harlem was late in the game. New Orleans and Chicago had Kansas City had jazz scenes first. Musicians gravitated from these southern cities, and indeed Harlem was a hotbed, which sadly it is not at the moment. In fact, one of the few remaining jazz clubs, Lenox Lounge, just closed, and I'm heartbroken about that. And there's almost no jazz in Harlem today. People are not jumping at the Woodside or stopping at the Savoy or even celebrating at the Apollo anymore. And I have a great Apollo story, which I will tell you later.
Yeah, no, I think.
Or now, if you want.
No. I want to go back. I think it's something. I said it in pretty blasé fashion. That Harlem was the birthplace, and I think that what I really probably should have said was that I'm curious. In my mind, one thing that made jazz so elastic and allowed it to spread into all different idioms of music was the fact that many African Americans migrated to Harlem because there was an Afrocentric approach to the music, which I think that's what jazz is. And I wonder
that they played in clubs that blacks couldn't get into. The Cotton Club would not admit blacks. When they finally did, they admitted them, but they sat them behind poles. The Harlem scene was not an integrated scene, which is interesting, is very interesting. The Navy tried to close the Savoy Ballroom because there were blacks and whites dancing together. They claimed it was a health hazard, that their sailors were picking up venereal disease. The Harlem scene is a strange scene. And interestingly enough, my next concert, which celebrates 40 years of highlights in jazz, features the Harlem Blues and Jazz Band, which is a band made up of veterans of the great swing bands. Art Barron is going to be playing. He was one of the last people Duke Ellington ever hired. Jackie Williams is going to be playing, who was the drummer of choice for Roy Eldridge and later Doc Cheatham. We got some wonderful people on that show. And it's just so fitting that it's the Harlem Blues and Jazz Band, and that band has existed, but with differing personnel, also for tenor player, Fred Staten, who's the older brother of Dakota Staten, is going to celebrate his 98th birthday the night of the concert. So it's pretty exciting.
I want to go back to the beginnings of your career in music, because you were really I think it's a really compelling story. You had a pretty good gig. Obviously, I thought it was you were the assistant attorney general. Talk about walking away. What is as far as success was concerned? I mean, you could have sat there and made a great living, had a tremendous amount of political clout, and really had a lot of prestige, but you chose to do something that was in your soul. I'd like you to take my audience through that evolutionary process in that part of your life.
Well, for a number of years, I had the best of both worlds. I had a day job and a great hobby. And I stayed at the Attorney General's office until I was 55. I've been retired 21 years ago. You can do the math and figure out how old I am. But I did it simultaneously. From 9 to 5, I wore, I don't want to say Clark Kent, Superman, but I wore one type of uniform and was in one world. And then in the evening, I was in another one.
Right.
And I saved my sanity. It was cheap therapy, and I wasn't crazy about my job at that point. The novelty had worn out. I was trying cases. I was predominantly a trial lawyer for the Attorney General's office. And, the excitement had gone out of it some time earlier. So back in 1973, I was frequenting jazz clubs almost every night. And a number of musicians, Bucky Pizzarelli and a clarinetist, Phil Bodner, and Zoot Sims, the saxophonist, grabbed me one night and said, you're comfortable with musicians and you love the music. Why don't you take over a club or rent a hall, put on concerts, and get it out of your system? And, this registered in the back of my mind, and a couple of months later I was in an off-Broadway theater, and I thought to myself, geez, it's 299 seats, and they don't perform on Monday night. This would be a great place for a jazz concert. So I did exactly that, and I called Zoot Sims and Bucky Pizzarelli and the people who, had suggested it in the first place, and we were off and running. I rented the Theatre de Lys, which is still standing on Christopher Street. It's now called the Lucille Lortel Theater, and I rented it for 2 shows. Interestingly enough, I didn't think it was going to last 40 years, but I didn't want to have just one. I wanted to have 2 shows, a modern show and a traditional show.
For the audience, can you explain modern and traditional?
Yeah. You can almost explain it with a timeline. Mm-hmm. Music before 1950, music after 1950. But by modern, I mean what's commonly called bebop, and more progressive music. By traditional, I encompass traditional as Dixieland and swing. So the earliest style. This is the style that was popular when jazz was America's popular music.
Of course. It
was perhaps less cerebral, but it was something that the average person could grab onto and enjoy. People danced to it. The popular songs of the day were played by jazz musicians, as opposed to the more modern era where people wrote their own songs, although often based on the chords of popular songs. And we had 2 shows, and jazz concerts were novelty at the time. There were occasional concerts at Carnegie Hall, but not many, maybe 4 a year, 5 a year. And there was jazz at the Philharmonic, which toured colleges and played in just about every city. But those were one-night things. The idea of a concert series was something new. And we predate Jazz at Lincoln Center and the 92nd Street Y and every other series you can think of. At the time, the jazz critics for the three papers loved it. They thought this was sensational, that once a month there was going to be a great jazz concert featuring, name artists, mainstream artists, but not playing with their own groups, playing in a jam session format. We got wonderful press, which almost cost me my job.
Can we talk? That is one of the. Let's go through that story.
Picture story.
Yeah.
Which said prosecutor by day, jazz maven by night, or something like that. And the attorney general was not happy. He called me and he said, you're making it look like we run a clown show here, and you don't have enough work to do to keep you busy, and I absolutely forbid you to use your title, Assistant Attorney General, in any of your publicity. All right. It's his shop. It's a political job.
Right.
It hangs by a thread.
Right.
They had an undated letter of resignation. When you first signed up for this job, all they had to do was put a date on it, and then they'd say so-and-so tendered his resignation, blah, blah, blah. So, I followed his edict. And at that time, there was a very popular talk show in New York, which later went coast to coast, Joe Franklin. In fact, Joe is still on the radio in his 90s. And, to Joe, the story was exactly that I did one thing during the day and then did jazz concerts at night. So I warned him. I said, Joe, please, 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 don't use my title. And he was good about it. He just introduced me as an attorney in government, which is a vague term. It could be state government, it wasn't specific.
Right.
Unfortunately, the Attorney General himself went on Joe Franklin's show 2 weeks later. And the first words out of Joe's mouth is, we had one of your assistants down here. The kid runs a great jazz concert, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, boy.
So I got called in the next morning, and the Attorney General said, Jack, what are you going to do if I make you choose between these concerts and your job? And I thought for a minute. I said, don't do that, sir. He said, why not? I said, well, obviously I'm going to choose my job. I went to college. I went to law school. It's my profession. However, my press agent will have to issue a statement that we're canceling the rest of our concerts and breaking our contracts with musicians because the Attorney General of the state of New York feels it's undignified for a member of his staff to promote America's black art form. And I said the magic word. To make a short story out of it, I kept my job. I kept doing the concerts. I did not get a raise for 4 years, even when every other state attorney across the board was given a raise.
But
I wasn't fired.
No, and because you were able to keep the sanctuary of the highlights and jazz concerts, that in some ways, you could swallow that and be like, I'm okay with that, because yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was having fun. And,
but I just want to be clear.
It's still fun.
No, I want to be clear
about.
It's
still fun for me, Jake.
I want to be.
I MC it. I get on stage, and one night a month it's opening night. There's a show in my head of how I think it's going to sound, but until it actually happens, it's a mystery, and it's a lot of fun. It's really a lot of fun, and it's my hobby, and it's become my life. I've been retired from law since 1991, so this is what I do now exclusively.
How?
And I've had so much fun.
How is it that, from your perspective, I could not ask a better person for about this, but you said the magic word to your boss, and that was black art form. Why, as you look at it today, is the word jazz, is it still in a, I mean, you clearly still hold concerts and you bring in younger cats from all over the...
I don't believe it was ever a black art form. I said that because politically it was a way of getting his attention.
Right.
There have been white players, Jelly Roll Morton, Dick Spiderwick, since the earliest days. And again, the European players we spoke about. Neither do I think it's an exclusively American art form, like Ken Burns does. It was nice. He did his series of jazz programs, and they were wonderful. But he tried to relate changes in jazz to the Depression and World War II and things like that, and that's nonsensical. Louis Armstrong would have been a genius, no matter what was going on politically. Dizzy and Bird would have come up with bebop. I don't think the fact that World War II ended had anything to do with that. This is creativity, and this is genius. But it's also not. We would like to think it's just American. It's not.
Your rationale is that it's a blending of European and
everything. Afro-Cuban.
Yes.
Brazilian. There's so much that goes into it. I mentioned klezmer before. I did a show a few years ago, jazz/salsa/klezmer and other delights. And I had the Latin percussionist Ray Bernetto and his group, and Clark Terry and his band, and we brought in David Amram's Middle Eastern trio, which has a bouzouki and an oud, and Andy Statman, who's probably the premier klezmer clarinetist in the world even today, was a surprise guest on that show. And I didn't just have one group following another. I did a lot of mix and match. And there were a lot of times that all three were on stage together, finding a common ground. And it was amazing. And, you said to yourself, my God, the Latin influence in jazz goes way back to Jelly Roll Morton. He called it the Spanish tinge. And the klezmer thing, you hear it in so many musicians, not just clarinetists, but certainly the clarinetist, Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw. And, it's exciting music. It's folk music. And jazz has borrowed from all of that, just as it's borrowed from the Western European tradition. I mean, people that think jazz began in Africa, that's nonsense. There's a Western classical influence in even the earliest jazz. Ragtime was very formal, structured music.
But there was a period of there
borrows from everyone.
Right, but there was a connotation. It was more than veiled. I mean, when you talk to someone like Big Black, the African percussionists, where jazz. They added the white press corps added the ZZ because originally it was jazz, JASS, meaning if you want to go to the brothel to see this kind of music, you want to get some tail. So there was this connotation that it was this black music, sort of debaucherous kind of music. What do you say to people that? Because you talk to someone like Big Black, and he believes the word jazz came off just so that it would be more palatable for white audiences.
That's an interesting theory. I've never heard of that, but it's an interesting theory, and I got to think that one through.
Spoken like a true lawyer.
I don't have an answer. Certainly, there is a tradition of black musicians and performers entertaining for whites. It goes way back to people performing in the streets.
Right.
After slavery, one of the reasons New Orleans and places like that had so many musicians is these people realized that they could entertain. Louisiana has a very interesting history. It was French, and on Sunday they used to give the slaves the day off. I mean, think about that for a minute. So they would congregate and very often reunite with members of their families that were on other plantations, other homesteads. And they didn't have money to go to a show or anything else. So what did they do? They sang, they danced, they played homemade instruments in what was known as Congo Square. And whites would come and watch and enjoy it. So when slavery ended, these people realized that they had a marketable skill. They could perform, and white people might pay to see and hear them. And they played at parades and funerals and weddings and everything else. And that's one of the reasons that New Orleans was possibly the first center in America for jazz.
You know,
was that early tradition of the slaves performing.
Well, and in fact, when I did the interview with the great drummer Joe Chambers, he talked about
he is a great drummer.
The French sold off the Louisiana Purchase was completed because the French in Congo Square they had less less harsh slave tactics, and the drummers were starting to communicate through the drum. And they had lost some control, so they brought in. That's where the Louisiana Purchase was done. So the United States came in. They had much harsher slavery tactics, and in fact, it went down to 1 day a week. But there's
but think about it, giving them a day off.
Right.
It's almost comical. And yet, that was the only place that it happened.
Talking to Jack Kleinsinger, a tremendous attorney and also an incredible promoter and legacy holder. Jack, I don't think that the timing of the highlights of jazz when it started. I mean, just if you could, you got great press, but you think about. Guys you've mentioned, Dizzy, and thanks to the jazz video guy Brett Premack, he put out some of these amazing clips of this DVD.
Well, 1973 was an interesting time.
Yeah, go ahead.
In New York, because so many of the golden age players were still with us and living in New York. I mean, I could pick up the phone and call Lionel Hampton and Teddy Wilson, and they were willing to do concerts. Very inexpensively. They liked the idea of playing with their peers. It was something that was done after hours. Certainly, jam session. There's nothing new about it, but they enjoyed it. And I had this great wealth of musicians here. You could look in a phone book and find Dickie Wells, Buddy Tate. I mean, it was just amazing. And it was, for me, very exciting to put performers of different genres together. I still do that sometimes. A year ago, we had a show with, for instance, Joe Lovano, who's about as modern a player as you can get, along with Jimmy Heath, the bebop star, certainly, and Harry Allen, who plays in a swing tradition. And I put the three of them together, and it was magic. It exceeded my expectations 100 times over. I did a show a long time ago with John Faddis meets Doc Cheatham. They had known each other. They had never played together. They had never thought they would play together. I just recently did a show with Phil Woods and Lou Donaldson. Now, you would have thought that those two had played together. They hadn't. And I decided to throw Lou Tabakin in as a surprise guest. We have a surprise guest at every concert. Although sometimes, in addition to the surprise guest I plan on, somebody else makes an appearance. I had a show once where Jerry Mulligan came from the back of the auditorium. He unwrapped his saxophone and marched up the aisle and came on stage and played. Earl Hines was once in my house. He had come to see U.B. Blake. So sometimes you really luck out. And
but I guess the question
they know they're going to be called on.
The question I want to get at is, So you had Hamp, and you had and the point is that they wanted to play with their peers, but talk about the effect it had on the young guns, the younger guys. It
was wonderful. I used Hampton in a show with, at that time, McDonald's had a tri-state high school jazz ensemble, and I got the great idea that band would back Lionel Hampton. Now, in that band at the time was a young drummer named Kenny Washington. Kenny wound up playing with Hamp. It happened a number of times. Red Rodney performed with. By then, there was no longer a McDonald's, but there was still a tri-state high school jazz ensemble, and their drummer at the time was Greg Hutchison. And Red not only played with him, he later hired him. He heard that he was graduating from high school that year, and he hired him and took him on the road. He was Red's drummer for a year or so. I'm having Fred Staten, who I told you is turning 98. And one of my surprise guests is going to be a senior at the new school who has already played for me. And he's played with people like John Abercrombie and Joe Lovano's taken him under his wing. Stephen Frieda. Stephen just turned 22. So on the same stage, locking horns, so to speak, I got a 98-year-old and a 22-year-old. And the jazz tradition continues. I'm very proud of some of the young people who have made their debut at Highlights in Jazz. John Pizzarelli, at the age of 15. Jane Monheit, when she was a freshman at Manhattan School of Music. Kenny Washington again. Joe Saylor, who's the drummer now with Jonathan Baptiste. Wonderful drummer. That's fun for me. And it's fun. We had a young guitarist, you may know him, because he's got a few CDs out, Jake Herzog. It's fantastic, and he writes a monthly column for Guitar Player. Well, he was about 20 years old, and I put him up with Bucky Pizzarelli, who was about 80 at the time. And they sounded great together, and they enjoyed each other. And, we don't have the training grounds for musicians we used to have. Years ago, a kid would get out of Berkeley or Manhattan School of Music and go work with Woody Herman or Maynard Ferguson or, one of the big bands, and have the training and sit next to some guy who might have been playing for 20 years, 25 years, and learn. We don't have that today. So concerts like mine are one of the few chances where a younger player can get to play with one of the veterans, with one of the older guys. And I do that as often as I can. I'm one of the few producers that if somebody invites me to come to a senior recital, I go. And if I like them, I'll use them. Joe Walterman, 2 years ago, was graduating from NYU. Wonderful pianist. He invited me to his senior recital. I went, and he played Highlights. And Joe is doing very, very well. He's played at the Blue Note. He's played at Dizzy's Club, all our major clubs. And, I'm constantly looking. What worries me, Jake, is I see lots of talent out there. I don't see audiences of people that age. Unfortunately, when I go to a club or even my own concerts, the average age is 40 plus. And that worries me.
Well, my dad, when he goes to your concerts, he always makes note of the fact that you are pleading with the audience to get this stuff, get this music into the ears and expose younger generations. And it's a conundrum for I'm 34. I'm a veritable youngster myself, and it's just and you look at as a teacher, you look at some of the. I think as I go through this process and I interview a lot of musicians, guys that aren't necessarily even from this country, they talk about this idea of, things are happening at such a fast clip that you have no time to absorb what is happening before something new comes along. And so there's no time to marinate in what's going on, collaborations or music or LPs.
Good point.
Okay, so
Good point.
so when you have this attention span problem, and really, it's not their fault. They just are not accustomed to listening to intimate human beings playing music together. They're used to digital drum tracks, electronic music. So this is really foreign to them, and it's really I don't know, and I guess that was my point. Is, you know, my question here is for these younger cats who are doing it, and that they're forging that link from the 90-year-old to the 22-year-old. What are the challenges that they have to overcome that were not there when Kenny Washington was under the tutelage of Ham?
Very, very good question, and there is an answer. They grew up. Your father, who of course I remember fondly, and I've known God since the 50s, grew up in an era, as did I, where there was one TV set in the house or one radio. And we listened to what our families were listening to, what our grandparents were listening to. There was a common music that was heard, for better or worse. Today, the 8-year-old has his own iPad, the 12-year-old has his own thing, and the music business has reached out specifically to that kind of thing. So the chance of a kid even listening to the music that his older brother listens to, if there's a 7 or 8 year gap, is unlikely, let alone the music that the parents listen to. So where's a kid going to hear jazz? There's almost no music education. New York City, which used to be great, kids used to be able to join an orchestra in their school, and there were instruments for them to learn on and play. There's none of that anymore. So where are they going to hear jazz? You know, I have a wonderful friend, Michael Wolf. You know Michael.
Of course.
He's a great pianist.
Oh, yeah.
Played with Cannonball Adderley and Sonny Rollins. And,
Cal Jader?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. And he's got a group now with Michael Clark, the drummer from the Headhunters, called the Wolf Clark Expedition. Now, he has 2 boys, and they're wonderful kids. They really are. They had a cable TV show for 4 years called The Naked Brothers Band. And they were very successful. But their demographic was girls 14 and under, let's say. All right, now they're older. The show is off the air. But an older group of girls would listen to the Jonas Brothers, let's say. An older group than that would listen to Kiss. So there's not, like us, we all heard Ella Fitzgerald. My mother and father loved Ella Fitzgerald. I loved Ella Fitzgerald. If I had a kid, that kid would have loved Ella Fitzgerald.
Right.
Because we were listening together.
Right.
And that's a big part of them. I offer, at least twice a year, my customers, I tell them, if you bring a kid under 18 and you buy a ticket for yourself, he goes for free, he or she. You know how many people take me up on it? Maybe 8, 10. And we're talking free.
Right.
So
yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. I wish I knew the answer.
No, I think what you're in a macro sense, you're talking about a situation where everybody was listening to the same stuff. It was cross-generational. And now you have everything. You use the key term with the Wolf kids. They're demographic. It's all about demographics. Marketing came in, and everything. The business model, the efficiency model, has been applied to everything, which is asinine. Because when you have something as esoteric and as free form as music, that is going to create this kind of stratification that we are currently, in right now. I mean, it also is the dumbing down of our society, done very intentionally by individuals who want to take symphonies out of the out of the school systems. And there's a lack of leadership on the part of the goal. I forget the term you use, but the idea that these older sages, in a sense that they don't have a platform to speak from, and I'm talking about Sonny Rollins and and Gary Bartz and the idea that these guys are true. I have never. I mean, as a caveat to the audience here, Jack Kleinsinger has been extremely influential in being able to guide me towards a lot of sort of off the beaten path musicians, guys like Al Gaffa and bigger names like Bernard Purdie. When I interview Bernard Purdie, I mean, you want to talk about humanity. You want to talk about love. You want to talk about somebody who's going to sit there and answer your questions and actually have a ball doing it. And that's what real mentoring, real leadership, real role models are about. And yet your kids get plugged into their iPhones and they're listening to digital music. It's not done by people. It's not being done by Cannonball or Mike Wolf or Nat Adderley. It's being done
by an engineer.
It's done by computers. How does it sound? Terrible. We'll come up and fix it. And even though when you started those highlights in jazz, Zoot, they might be fighting off, they might be, shivering with a drug addiction. They have their own evils. But you know what? They'd come up there and they'd blow from their soul. And anybody who was in the audience would be affected on a consciousness level, big time.
Jake, if kids could attend a concert, they would love it. I did a program for many years called Adopt a Class. It was set up when I forget who the mayor was, but I was with the Attorney General's office at the time. And the idea was that no matter what walk of life you were with, you would spend 2 hours a week with an inner city 7th grade class. And they recruited me from the Attorney General's office. They basically asked for a volunteer. I volunteered. I thought, hey, that sounds great. And I would teach them about law. We would have mock trials and, law that pertained to their lives and stuff like that. And it was a nice program. Okay? After a couple, and people in the program included Beverly Sills, the great opera singer, Ed Koch, the former mayor, had a class in Chinatown. Ellinghouse, who was the head of AT&T, had a class, was teaching them all about, communications. Vitas Gerulaitis, the tennis player, had a class. And whatever your skill was, you shared. Okay? Now, came a time I said, this is Adopt a Class, and I'm supposed to be teaching them about law, but a big part of my life is jazz. And I got permission to switch and teach them about jazz. And I brought Ray Barretto to school. I brought a tap dancer to school. I arranged with Lincoln Center so the kids could go to a rehearsal. And they loved it. I showed them videos, including the video of the Lee Konitz, Roy Haynes concert that people can see at YouTube. And the kids loved it, all right? It cost the city of New York nothing. We were all volunteers. And trust me, high-level people, Beverly Hills, you don't get any better than that. Kids loved it. You're bringing
Ray Barretto in.
They ended the program.
I mean, what I would do to sit there and watch Ray Barretto do different Afro-Cuban and bossa nova rhythms on the conga drum.
We did better than that. We gave the kids percussion instruments to play.
Unbelievable.
Along with them. It was great. Now, they ended the program because they felt it was taking time away from the preparation for the standardized math and reading tests. So, what we have now in New York City, of all places, you can't get music or art in a school unless you go to a specific performing arts school, like LaGuardia School for the Performing Arts, something like that. But the average middle school, high school, it's not in the curriculum anymore. Not even classical music, by the way. So, where are the kids going to hear it? Left to their own devices, their own iPads, they're not going to turn on a jazz station, with all due respect to you. Mm-hmm. And that's the heartache of it. I have kids coming out that 19, 20 years old, and they're playing for people their parents' age. And that's the audience.
Yeah, and especially if you make it so that it's only specialized schools, then there's only that kind of creativity going on within that school system. And I know many guys from tough single family households where they grew up, and a guy like Harvey Mason, the drummer, he told me straight out, he goes, Jake, I wouldn't be anywhere today without the instruction that I got in my music programs in the public school system, because I came from, my mother raised 8 kids, and without that stepping ladder, without that leadership, without that mentorship, and then the ability to be able to go and play with George Shearing and to be able to go,
right.
And that was it, and so there are things that are hindering the younger. We've identified several problems here. I mean, it's as Mike Longo, the piano player, says, it's a supply and demand issue. Tremendous players, not enough places to hear the music, and I think
it's equivalent to the law schools. They're turning out more and more and more law students, and I'm sure they're bright. I'm sure they're capable. There's no job.
No jobs.
The music schools, I get tapes from kids in Manhattan School of Music or the New School or Juilliard, and there's fantastic talent out there. But where they're going to play? Where's the audience? And you're right. It's supply and demand.
If you going back to the, can you talk about the support you got from guys who were involved with, like we talked about before, the Latin scene? There was a great label called the Fania label.
Oh,
okay.
Ralph Mercado, who grew up in the Bronx, not far from me, and originally owned a bowling alley. And
but I mean, how important was it to get the support from minority leaders? Because the blending of that just filled right into the Kleinsinger methodology.
That was very helpful. And I knew Ralph. Ralph was a rough guy, but his heart was in the right place. And Ray Barretto, I took Ray to Berlin. I was asked to bring a highlights and jazz group to the Berlin Jazz Festival in the 80s. So I brought a group I called Battle of the Big Horns, 4 baritone saxophones. You got a picture of this. Ronnie Cuban, Nick Brignola, Cecil Payne, and Howard Johnson.
That's
and a rhythm section with Junior Mance, Rufus Reed, a drummer Walter Bolden, who had played with Lambert Hendrickson Ross, and Ray Barretto. And Ray had the time of his life because it wasn't a Latin gig. He loved playing mainstream. He played with Dexter. He played with Stanley Turrentine. He played, he preferred a show that wasn't a Latin show. And Tito Puente was another guy. Ray once had to cancel on a show with me called Accent on Percussion. And I was furious. I said, how can you do this to me? We've advertised. He said, I'll send a sub. I said, who are you going to send, Tito Puente? He said, yeah, I'll send Tito. And he did. Tito came, at the time of his life, did 3 shows with me after that. Played with people like Phil Woods, and John Faddis, Ray Bryant, Frank West. At the time of his life. And he didn't have to be a leader. He was perfectly happy to be part of it. Now, do I just let them go on stage and look at each other and say, what are we going to play now? No, I've structured my concerts. I don't call the tunes, but I know when there's going to be a ballad. I know when there's going to be a piano feature. I know when the surprise guest is coming up, and it works.
Why do you think you from the way back in '73 with Joe Beck, Joe Farrell, Herb Bushler, and Jimmy Madison? Why do you feel you connected on a spiritual level with these guys as a non-musician?
Because I don't know. I always wanted to be in show business. I was a ham. When I was 13 and a half, I ran away, and I was heading to Hollywood with the addresses of all the Hollywood studios. Now, I had no talent at all that I know of, and I was convinced that all I had to do was present myself and, get a job. I got as far as Chicago and turned back. It's a funny story because my parents didn't even know I was gone. It was a weekend. They thought I was going to at one of my friends' house for the weekend. Sunday night they found out I was gone. But, I always wanted to be part of that. And jazz musicians, when I was growing up, were among the most colorful people in the world. I mean, more than baseball players even. And I love baseball players. But Cat Calloway, Roy Eldridge, they were larger than life in every sense. Suit. They were characters. And that part of it appealed to me probably as much as the music. They were so much fun. And part of the joy over the last 40 years has been being part of that world. And I've become a character myself. But, Dizzy Gillespie. My cat is named for Dizzy. When Dizzy heard that I had a cat named Dizzy, he had to come over to see the cat, He was talking to him. Clark Terry. These guys are fantastic. And they were entertainers, too. They didn't just stand up there and blow their horns.
Well, it seemed like they actually, in a lot of ways, allowed you to evolve into the charismatic entertainer that you always wanted to be.
I'm getting this year the 2013 Bistro Award, which is quite an honor for Outstanding Music Series. And when they sent the announcement, 99% of their awards go to performers. Maurice Hines is getting an award, Lainey Kazan, people like that. In the jazz, the cabaret, the comedy field. And they said that recipients are invited to perform. I don't think they meant recipients of an award like I'm comedy. Jake, can I just see who this call is and I'll get rid of them?
No problem.
Okay. We are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the series on Valentine's Day. And the Bistro Award is exciting because, among other things, it's going to give me a chance to talk and tell some musician stories, which I've got. I have had more fun than anybody that attends my concerts. And I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can. It's 314 shows and counting. And I can't thank people like you for the support and the encouragement. You really, there are times you say to yourself, is it worth doing this? Is it worth keep doing it? The audience is dwindling, blah, blah, blah. And then I meet somebody with your enthusiasm, and I know it's worthwhile.
Well, you have been a conduit to the growth of my evolution as a journalist, as a broadcaster, and as a, and to be able to find myself through these larger-than-life individuals, and I can't thank you enough. Ironically enough, you're at 314. My birthday is March 14th, 314. So we will...
We have a concert March 14th. Swing Memories. Marty Shaw with strings, a 25-piece band that includes Wycliffe Gordon, Howard Alden, Warren Bechet, and led by the Anderson twins, who graduated from Juilliard about 2-3 years ago, identical twins who both play clarinet. So we'll celebrate your birthday.
Well, and Jack, continued success. I think one of the most important things that you can continue to do in this next chapter of your promoting career is just continue the building those links in the fence between the older generations and the newer generations, and allowing more opportunities for those guys to intermesh and collaborate, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that lived through this rich period of time that we so love, that I didn't live through, but you did. So as you continue to be inventive, continue to be creative, continue to fashion.
Jake, I really want to do a part 2 with you.
Of course we will, Jack. And it was an honor to talk to you, part 1, and we'll do a part 2 real soon, okay?
Thank you so much.
Take care, sir.
For give me the chance to mouth off. And
I had a ball. We'll do it again soon.
Great.
Take care, Jack.
Have a great day.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.